Welcome to this new automotive news video for Monday, July 13th, 2026. On today's agenda, Renault and Peugeot caught out by a new European auto regulation, Porsche permanently ending a top-selling model, and Audi updating all its car technology for the French market. I hope the topics in this first video of the week will interest you. If that's the case, as usual, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like on this video, subscribing for the next ones, boosting this one, and of course, leaving a comment where you share your opinion on today's news. Before we start this week's topics, I have two quick things to share. The first thing is that the sound and editing of this video might be quite different from what I usually offer you, for the simple reason that I'm traveling, so I don't have the same equipment as usual. And secondly, I wanted to add a little clarification regarding some information I shared with you last week. Remember, we were talking about the Mercedes CLA 45 AMG, the first fully electric AMG car based on an already existing Mercedes. You were surprised in the comments to find that this CLA 45 AMG had a 94 kilowatt-hour battery, a battery that allows it to have about 670 kilometers of range, and a battery that the regular CLA doesn't get. That one only gets 58 or 85 kilowatt-hour batteries, which are much smaller. Some comments wondered why Mercedes didn't decide to put the 94 kilowatt-hour battery in the base CLA, which would probably have allowed it to get close to 900 kilometers of range, since it's much more aerodynamic in its design than the CLA 45 AMG, which is more focused on performance than true versatility. Well, we got the answer to that question, since it's a purely commercial decision. Mercedes doesn't want to put this 94 kilowatt-hour battery in the base CLA because it would give it better range than the C-Class, which is actually higher up in the lineup and in its fully electric version only has 750 kilometers of range, even though it's more expensive. So Mercedes made this choice to make sure that customers who want to drive more kilometers on a single charge simply accept paying more by choosing a higher-end model. The main topic today is going to be Renault and Peugeot, as well as more generally Stellantis, the entire automotive group that owns Peugeot, but also Citroën, DS, Fiat, and so on. These two major automotive groups risk paying a high price for a new decision made by the European Commission regarding the IAA. The IAA is a new piece of legislation that plans to give a fiscal and administrative advantage to cars with 70% of their components sourced from Europe. And so for electric cars, three main components of these batteries are produced in Europe. At first glance, you might think this would benefit French brands like Renault and Peugeot, except that they decided about 15 or even 20 years ago to move a large share of their car production abroad. Peugeot manufactures some models sold in France and Morocco, for example. Dacia has its Sandero manufactured in Morocco, and Renault, for example, has its Clio manufactured in Turkey. As you can see, these are countries that are not part of the Eurozone and would not allow these cars, these models, to benefit from those well-known tax and administrative advantages. For several weeks now, and we've already had the chance to talk about it in other videos, Renault and Peugeot have joined forces in a fight against the European Commission to try to obtain some sort of exemption or to get the Commission to agree under the IAA to include countries that are not part of the European Union, such as Morocco, Turkey, or even Japan. The goal was to keep producing their cars there while still enjoying those well-known tax advantages. But the problem is that according to the latest news, despite all their efforts, the European Commission simply refused. The final text of the IA will be voted on in December 2026, but currently, it would only be reserved for countries that are part of the European Union, with an exception for England, which should be able to take part. If this version of the text were adopted at the end of the year, the consequences could be quite significant for Renault and Peugeot, since in order to benefit from the tax advantages of this IA, to avoid being at a disadvantage compared to brands manufacturing entirely in the European Union, they would need to move production back to Europe, which could be very costly. You should know that in the case of Stellantis, for example, the group was planning to have almost 1 million cars manufactured per year between Turkey and Morocco. Although it would likely be great news for the European automotive industry, with more factories in Europe, it also means more production lines and more employees hired to build these extra cars. This could negatively affect French people's wallets. Renault and Peugeot have already estimated that it is quite possible for a 208 or a Clio, manufactured in Hungary, for example, rather than in Morocco, costs several hundred or even several thousand euros more, which could further worsen the decline in car sales in Europe in an already quite complicated context. Obviously, Stellantis as well as Renault will continue their battle against the European Commission until the end of 2026, explaining that it was simply impossible to build a competitive automotive industry behind what they called a protectionist barrier. But French manufacturers are far from being the only ones having to make difficult choices. This week, Porsche surprised everyone by announcing it is discontinuing one of its most iconic models. Indeed, after 12 years on the market, the Porsche Macan is about to disappear for good. The last unit will roll off the production line at the end of July 2026. The odd thing, though, was that the first-generation Macan was still being sold, even though the second-generation Macan has been around for several years. You should know that the first-generation Macan was withdrawn from Europe since the introduction of the GSR2 standards, the safety regulations, that required Porsche to install several new safety features on its cars. Porsche refused to do this because it was considered not profitable enough. In Europe, only the second-generation Macan was still being sold, and that model was only available as a fully electric vehicle. While in other markets, like in the United States, for example, the first-generation Macan with a combustion engine was still being sold, and in many markets, it actually accounted for many more sales than the fully electric second-generation Macan. The numbers speak for themselves. In 2024, 78% of the Macans sold worldwide were still combustion engine versions. In 2025, the situation flipped because the combustion engine Macan was pulled from the European market, still a key market for the model. But surprise, in the first half of 2026, the trend reversed again. 35,000 Macans were sold worldwide, including 19,000 combustion engine models compared to only 15,000 fully electric ones. Aware of this demand, Porsche has even built up significant stocks of combustion engine Macans in North America in order to continue supplying its dealerships at least until the end of 2027. Meanwhile, Porsche admitted that releasing its replacement solely as an electric model was a major strategic mistake. Despite the qualities of the vehicle, part of the customer base simply did not go along with the brand's shift to electric vehicles. Faced with this situation, Porsche urgently launched the development of a new compact SUV that will be sold in gasoline and hybrid versions based on the PPC platform, which is already used by the new Audi Q5. The first prototypes have been on the road for over a year, but the CEO of Porsche announces that this model will arrive at the earliest by the end of 2028, which means, as you've probably guessed, that for the entire year of 2027 and for a good part of 2026 and 2028, the gas-powered Macan will have no successor. And so Porsche will have to do without one of its biggest commercial successes for almost 2 years, while the company is going through a particularly difficult period. While Porsche now admits to having made some bad choices, Audi prefers to completely change its strategy before it's too late. That's actually good news, but recently the Audi Q6 e-tron has officially become eligible for the ADIME Eco Score. This is an important distinction because it allows this German SUV to become the only premium SUV in the D segment to benefit from the benefits-in-kind tax break, a tax advantage highly sought after by companies who are ultimately the main customers for this type of vehicle. Let me give you a quick figure just so you get an idea of the situation. For the Audi Q6 e-tron, 70 to 80% of sales are made to companies. The problem is that a few months ago, there was a reform of benefits in kind for companies. Only cars that qualify for the Eco Score could continue to benefit from it. However, the Q6 e-tron couldn't get a good enough Eco Score to remain eligible. As a result, Audi completely redesigned the technology of this vehicle so that it would remain fiscally attractive for the French corporate market. Audi France convinced the parent company to invest several million euros to adapt the entire vehicle for the French market. A team of engineers was mobilized to make the vehicle lighter. About 20 kilos were saved by redesigning the structure of the vehicle using new materials. Audi also reworked its entire logistics. The vehicles are now transported from Bavaria using HVO fuel, which is a biodiesel that is indeed more expensive, but it helps to further reduce the vehicle's carbon footprint and therefore score better under the Eco Score system. But the most spectacular change concerns the batteries, because to improve its environmental score, Audi has dropped the Chinese giant CATL in favor of the Korean company Samsung SDI, whose cells are produced in Hungary. The brand says switching suppliers boosted their Eco Score by 10 points. You should know that for a vehicle to be eligible, it needs to reach 60 points, and the previous Q6 was at 40. This special version for the French market will be manufactured on a dedicated production line. Its 100 kilowatt-hour battery will allow it to have about 670 kilometers of WLTP range. And thanks to this Eco Score and the fact that this vehicle will ultimately be the only one in the D segment to benefit from the company car taxable benefit reduction, Audi hopes and believes that sales of its Audi Q6 e-tron will increase by 30% in France over the coming months. Knowing that for now, Audi has not announced any new price increases on its cars despite the battery change, which must still be more expensive than the previous Chinese batteries. We'll see if that's enough to boost sales of the Q6 e-tron. In any case, that's it for today's news. I hope you found the video interesting. If that's the case, as usual, I'm counting on you to show it by leaving a like. subscribing for future videos, and supporting with the join button below. I'll see you again tomorrow for a video recorded in more usual conditions. Thank you for watching this one and see you tomorrow. Bye.